John Lassing. It's May the 20th, 1990. We're at the Jewish Temple. John, for the record, for the tape, what is your full name?
John Morris Lassing, Jr.
And what is your address?
116 Laird Road.
Your telephone number is 352-6371.
Yes, it is.
Your birth date?
April 24, 1925.
And you and your wife and all of your children have all been born in Nashville?
Or Davidson County.
And
yes.
your parents ahead of you?
Yes.
Your ethnic background?
White, Scotch-Irish,
A little bit of German.
Methodist, a little bit of German, Methodist.
What was your father's occupation?
He was an oil distributor,
And your mother?
housewife,
What did you do before 1941?
student.
You were born in 1925, you said, in Nashville, and so you were a student. Do you remember what grade you were when the war broke out?
Yeah, very well remember when they bombed Pearl Harbor. I was a senior at Columbia Military Academy.
So that was a prep school, down in
Columbia, Tennessee.
You remember?
43 miles south of Nashville.
You were getting a kind of military training.
Yes. My father had believed that we might get in the war that England was already involved in. And he thought that it'd be best for me to go to a ROTC military school and get training. And then maybe when the war did come, I would be able to get a commission, which didn't pan out, but that's none the problem.
Now, you must be like me. I was in Georgia, and we only had 11 grades then. Was that true then? Did you have 11 or 12?
We had 12.
You did.
But I had made up one early in my school career.
So you were graduating.
So I was going to I did graduate after Pearl Harbor in June. Pearl Harbor was in December.
So
I
you
graduated the following June.
17.
Right.
When did you join the Army?
The next year, I came home and worked in my dad's plant. And we had the draft then, and I volunteered to be drafted early.
Well, now, would you clarify that a little bit? You volunteered rather than were actually called up.
Right. We knew that some of us were going to be drafted, let's say, in September. And we thought, a friend of mine and I thought we might get a little bit ahead of the hound if we went on and went to the draft board and said, take us now and let us get a chance, to do some of the things we wanted to do.
Where were you sent for training?
Well, yes. I was inducted in the Army at Fort Oglethorpe, which is down next to Chattanooga. Came back home for 9 days and went from here to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Camp Shelby, for basic training, and had my basic training at Camp Shelby. And then I left there and went to Augusta, Georgia. It's now called Fort Gordon. Then it was Camp Gordon. It was a real experience for an 18-year-old, because I had turned 18 in April when I was asked to go over there. And it was something that I had not counted on. But I thought it was going to work out because I had applied during my induction, to go into the program at Georgia Tech, which the Army had programs there that would put you in engineering school and things like that, professional type deals. And I had taken the test and passed it, had the grade, and never got there.
So what did they assign you at?
They then assigned me to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, gave me a 10-day furlough and sent me to Camp Kilman, New Jersey to go to Europe.
Well, now at Fort Gordon, going back Camp Gordon.
Yeah,
Then.
yeah.
What were you being trained there to do?
Be cannon fodder. That sounds bad, doesn't it?
As an infantry?
Infantryman, yes. When they transferred me to Fort Bragg, they gave me some medical training. Let me learn how to shoot an orange with a syringe and needle, and let me learn several things like that. I didn't know why at the time. And we went up and got on the boat, went over to England, and I got some more of it over there.
Some more medical training.
Medical training. And then when we finally did go to Europe, I was a medic.
Okay, now what army were you a part of?
Well, you've got to understand that there wasn't any necessary you're in here or here or here. It wasn't solidified like I thought it was going to be. I was in the 79th Infantry Division when I went overseas. When I went to the coast, I was still in it. But 2 days on a coast, and I was detached from it and attached to the 2nd Armored Division because the tanks were on the coast by that time, and they were moving so fast that infantry people couldn't keep up with them. The infantry's trying to walk, and they're moving, and there's no way you could keep up. So that's what I did. That's where I got on the coast.
Which coast?
Omaha Beach.
Aha. So you're talking about when after D-Day.
Well, I'm talking about late, sometime after 1 o'clock D-Day. I waited out. The Navy told us they were going to run us up on the beach and drop the thing. We'd run out on the sand. Well, they dropped the thing all right, but the water was about shoulder high on me when we went out. And it was interesting. They were shooting at us, and and I pulled a boy out of the ocean as I went up on the beach. I don't know who he was, but I pulled him.
So you went into France on June 6, 1944 in what?
The 6th or 7th wave.
And you went in as a part of an infantry unit.
79.
But then after on the coast were assigned to the 2nd Armored.
When Betty and I went back to Europe in 1985, there's a little fenced cemetery on Omaha Beach. And I carried the first casualty that I had, or that I picked up, to that cemetery for burial. And that was late in the afternoon, almost dark, of D-Day. And then we went on from there. And by the time we got, of course, you know, Omaha was solid cliffs. And by the time we got up on top of the cliff, it was dark. And we started going. And they fired the tanks up the next morning, and we started moving. We had orders, anything pops up, shoot it. Of course, I didn't even have a gun, so what difference did it make?
Why didn't you have a gun?
Medics were not allowed to carry any guns.
You mentioned getting medical training. When were you formally assigned to be a medic, John? When did that happen?
I guess I was formally known as a medic in March of 44, excuse me, before we went to the France in June.
So while you were in
So
England,
I had a couple of months of what do you do with this man's leg got a hole in it big as your head? You know, how do you patch it? How do you sprinkle sulfur in it? Sure, but how do you do it? How do you bandage it? How do you get him help to get back, On the beach, we didn't have time for that. On the beach, we pulled them up and got them out of the water. And the LCI Navy people came in and picked them up and carried them back to England.
So that's what you meant when you said you saved somebody.
Yeah, I just pulled him on out of the water up on the beach.
You were working as a combat medic.
Well, I don't know whether I ever got the official designation combat medic like they did with the combat infantryman, but that's basically what I did.
And so when you joined the armored unit?
Same thing.
Same thing.
Same thing. The only thing the armored unit did for me, it gave me a partner to help and gave me a Jeep to keep up.
So now, would you tell us then about what the next months were like, this from, say, June of 44 through the rest of that year?
Yes, I'll be glad to, because there really wasn't. There were some pockets of fighting, and there were some injuries and some trouble, but there really wasn't what I'd call a pitched battle. We'd have skirmishes, and we'd have, at the Hertigan Forest, we had a pretty good battle. That's the one I remember most.
Now, which direction?
We were moving east toward Germany.
Okay.
And the Hertigan Forest is east of Paris. It's around Epinal and Nancy, France. And what they did was they pulled the Second Armored out of the line. We'd been in since D-Day. And they pulled it out of the line and sent the 100th Infantry Division in. And they got cut up pretty bad. They were green and they got cut up pretty bad. So after that, we went back into the lines and never came out till it was all over. And we didn't, I'd say from the time we crossed the Rhine River, and I crossed the Rhine River at Mannheim, I'd say from the time we crossed the Rhine River, it was a pretty foregone conclusion of how many are we going to take prisoner and how many are we going to kill, basically. They had lost all their zeal for fighting. That's the Wehrmacht. That was the German army. Now, you had some fanatical black boots, I call them, that were like the SS troopers. And they didn't want to give up, period. So we had pockets of them that had to be worked out, So but there was not any real, we had not really seen anything until I got to Dachau, and that's when it all hit the fan.
When did you cross the Rhine? Do you remember other major cities along the way or anything?
Well, of course, no, let me say that I remember us going through some good cities. You said you had been over there. You said you had been to the Cathedral. Do you remember the Cathedral at Chartres, France?
Oh, yes.
We went through and took Chartres. That's one I remember. We came up to Versailles and stopped under the pretext of letting General de Gaulle take his capital city. And he couldn't do it. So we had to go on to Paris, and we were actually, I wasn't the first one in. None of us were first, because they'd put enough in there to go in to really scoop it up, And then after we left Paris, Fontainebleau, and Nancy, and Epinal, and what is the Baccarat? Is that where the crystal comes from? Mm-hmm. We took that, and they're just some of the French towns. Strasbourg, I was in Strasbourg, and then they pulled us out and sent us up north of there to cross the Rhine. and we crossed the Rhine at Mannheim on a Army engineer bridge, because the Germans blew everything that was on the Rhine. They didn't want us in Germany, you know, so they blew those bridges. But we had some good engineering battalions, and they fixed us up with bridges that we could cross. And it's funny to see a pontoon bridge and see a 28-ton tank get on that thing and run downhill to the middle of the river and then run uphill to get out, because the bridge gives with all that weight. But it worked. We didn't have any losses there, and it worked. And we took Mannheim and went to Heidelberg. There's a big university at Heidelberg. And we went there. And then we started southeast from Heidelberg and went to try to go and come into Munich from a different angle that the Germans thought we would be doing. And we were successful in that. Only trouble was that I never got to Munich.
Okay, now, in all of this, did you see a lot of combat? Did you work as a medic?
Yeah, I worked as a medic, yes.
Had you seen horrible things all along?
Well, yeah. Louis Swerzik, my partner, and I picked up a man that had both legs and both arms blown off. I'd say that was pretty horrible. I laid on a stretcher in a collecting company and pumped my blood out of my left arm into him to try to save him. No way. He was way too far gone. The shock was too great. He couldn't do it. But, you know, that's bad. But you understand that that man was there of his own volition, trying to do a job to make this country free. And he gave it his all. There's no more. Later on, some of the people I saw were not there of their own volition.
All right, but you were a battle-hardened vet.
I'd say as hard as you could get from battle, yes.
Okay. So you wouldn't describe yourself as tender at that point? You'd seen a lot.
Yes, I had. No, I was not tender. I was not tender 3 hours off of the beach. It just doesn't work that way. If you believe in your country and you believe in freedom, you get hard.
But nothing had prepared you for Dachau.
Oh, no, nothing. Nothing on earth. There are 4 of us in this room that are normally healthy, wholehearted individuals. There were thousands of them who had been decimated to nothing. And yet they had that look out of their eye. I want to be free. Sorry. Well, that was before I got into German.
I'll pick. You ready? All right, this is John Lassing, interview, segment 2. It's May the 20th, 1990. John, we're going through the Second World War now. I asked you if you were a battle-hardened veteran. You had been in the Battle of the Bulge, as we know it?
Well, excuse me, not the Battle of the Bulge so much. What had happened was the 2nd Armored Division was a little southwest of Strasbourg, France. We were then attached to the 3rd Army, which was George Patton's army. We had been attached earlier, a good little bit earlier, to Patch's 1st Army when we came in on the beach and through most of France. But when we got over to Alsace-Lorraine, they sent us south to the Colmar region of France, and we were in what we call the Colmar Pocket. We went down there and got kind of cut off, and we had to fight our way out. And that was all right. And we didn't have any trouble doing that. It wasn't a big deal. But the way we got out of there was late one afternoon, we were trying to reconnoiter an area to find out where the soft spot was that we could punch through. And here comes Patton's Jeep. Now, you couldn't mistake George Patton's Jeep. It looked like a Jeep until you got to the driver. And he had welded around him tank steel all the way around him. I'm talking about the driver now. I'm not talking about General Patton. And somebody asked the general why. And he said, because if they kill my driver, I'm a dead duck. So you protect him. And they did. And I guess that was the same driver that was driving the car when George Patton died. As far as I know, I wasn't over there, so I don't know that for sure. But he came charging into our area and got out of that Jeep and got up on a tank. Now this is December, and it's pretty cold down there. But he got up with just his normal inside clothes on and stood on that tank. He had 2 pearl-handled revolvers in a belt wrapped around his waist. And he stood up there, and I was expecting, I had never been around him or heard him or anything, and I was expecting a big man, 6'4", 250 pounds maybe. I was expecting a deep bass voice to come at me. And the squeakiest little voice you ever saw came at me. But what it said was that the Germans had surrounded General McAuliffe in Bastion. And they asked him to surrender, and he said, nuts. And he said, Patton said, gentlemen, we are going and get him. Patton's lead tank driver was a buck sergeant. He said, do we do this under blackout? Patton said, hell no. We turn him on. We're going to get him. We did. And I guess that it took us three days and 3 nights. We got there the 3rd night. We were on the hills southeast of Bastion. And the snow was above my ankles. And it was cold. And we sat there and waited. And Patton said, in the morning, we'll go get him. And I thought, boy, it's going to be tough. Foggy, no air cover, no nothing. Lord smiled on us. Christmas Eve dawned bright. And our Air Force put enough planes in the sky to chop the Germans up. For 3 hours, you couldn't hear yourself think for the airplane engines. They really landed on them. And we went down and got General McAuliffe. Not us alone. We had people all around Bastion that were coming. They came in from different sectors. It wasn't by ourselves. We didn't do anything much by ourselves. We had help, and lots of it most of the time. And we just went and got our general. That's all.
John, I'm curious. You were 19.
Right.
Just a boy.
Right.
Do you remember whether you felt like a boy or a man then?
Didn't have any feelings either way. Felt like a tired dog face. Dog face is slang for combat infantryman. Felt like I tired. Outside of that, nothing. I had no sensation of whether I was a boy or a man or anything. All I wanted to do was get it over and come home.
You said that, and that you were fighting for our freedom. And
That's exactly right.
had you heard anything about German atrocity?
I hadn't heard anything at that time.
Nothing.
We had heard absolutely. Well, in fact, when we got into Germany, when we got into Mannheim and Heidelberg and those towns, nothing. I mean, we thought, yeah, it's an enemy town, we'll take it. But there's nothing basically wrong here. Not at all.
Okay, so tell us about going on over toward Munich and how you got to
Well,
Dachau.
When we got through at Bastion, which was, we actually took it Christmas Day of 1944. And when we got through there, Patton had us stay up there just in case they decided they'd try it again through the weak spot. McAuliffe, General McAuliffe it was really caught in a bind because he didn't have any people left. Bastion was one of the big American killing places. The Malmedy Crossroads slings and all that kind of stuff were right there, and they probably killed more Americans in the Battle of the Bulge than anywhere else, in any one battle over there. And he wanted us to stay. So we stayed till about January, which would have been a week, basically. And then we went back the exact route we had come up from the south and got back into Colmar. And that's why we were trying to get down and come into Munich from the southwest, with them looking at us coming from the west and the northwest. But as I told you, I never got to Munich. The only time I was ever in Munich was when we went back over there in '85. She and I went to Munich. But I had never been in Munich. Berchtesgaden? Ah, yes. If you remember, Berchtesgaden was Hitler's mountain retreat. And we thought that rascal was up there. They couldn't find him in Berlin, and we thought he was up there, and we stormed up that thing to get him. Of course, he wasn't there when we got there. But anyway,
This was March,
anyway,
maybe?
we tried. This was April, probably.
April 1945.
And I had been to Dachau before I went to Berchtesgaden. So it was late April, maybe early May, but late April for sure. And I thought, boy, it would be great if we could find him and capture that rascal. Because we had seen Dachau then.
Tell us about getting to Dachau.
Well, we approached Munich, as I said, from the southwest. Somewhere along the line, we got crossed up. Maybe the Germans had changed the road signs. Maybe they hadn't. Maybe the roads weren't ever meant to be that way. But we got crossed up. Dachau is about 60 miles. Look, I'm calling 45 years of memory here now. It's about 60 miles from Munich, maybe 65. And it is west-northwest of Munich. So as we approached, we got confused, and instead of going to Munich, we went to Dachau. And Dachau was a little town. There wasn't much resistance there. We took that without any problem. And then somebody got wind of encampment. And we went to the encampment. And when I show you some of these pictures, I'll show you where we went in and how we went in.
Now, this is the 2nd Armored,
Well, that's the division.
and these are the first troops to go into
Well,
Dachau?
I won't say they're the first. We were among the first.
first.
Everybody's converging now. Once word gets out that we've got this thing, and everybody's converging, there's a pocket of SS people, black boots as I call them, up there. And they're not going to give up. You're going to have to go in there and get them. And nobody in our group had any reservations about going in there and getting them. They were hated people. And nobody had any reservation. That was fine, you know. But what we saw when we got in there changed everybody's mind. It's hard for me to imagine now running through that gate and stopping and having looking down and having him pull my leg. He couldn't speak my language, but he was hungry. He wanted to pull up. He wanted food. Starving. I bet he didn't weigh any more than Mr. Kadar did. Had been a 180-pound man, starved. Let me give you a little history. Maybe you already know this. Adolf Hitler came to power about the time Franklin Roosevelt did in this country, 1933. In January. In March of 1933, he opened Dachau as a concentration camp. Don't misunderstand me now. There was not the killing there then. And the sign over the gate as you came in said, "Work will make you free." But they didn't work. They were slave-driven on half diets, on lack of water. And so they deteriorated. And the longer they were there, the more they deteriorated. And the more people they brought in to do the work, the more they had to do something with the deteriorated people that they had. So at first they went out back of Dachau concentration camp and they took a bulldozer and they dug a 6-foot, 100-foot long trench. And they piled the bodies in it and covered them up. That's the kind of people you're dealing with. Then it got so bad they couldn't do that. So they built the crematoriums. And we found one old Polish fellow in Dachau who was almost positive that he had cremated his own son. Can you imagine how that man must have felt? It just defies description. We had so many of the inmates, and that's what I got to call them because that's really what they were, that had done things that normally you wouldn't do, that were whipped or beat into doing. When a man died, they stripped his clothes off. Any teeth he had in his mouth that had gold in them, they yanked out and saved the gold. Didn't want to bury anything that was of value. This is the kind of person you were dealing with. So, my sojourn in Dachau was not one I like to recall, but one I'd like for future generations to know so it would never happen again to any people. It shouldn't happen to anybody. And that's my purpose in being here. That's why between you, that's why between you and my family, I am here. And no other reason.
John, did you go in on the first day that Dachau was liberated?
Yes. Yes, I did. I can't say I was the first one in there. I can't say that there weren't other. Well, I know that the 42nd Armored, not Armored, 42nd Infantry Division came from another area and another way. And I believe there was a division that came in from the north that got through one of those railroad car gates. And it, I don't know, you got to understand, it was a mess. And nobody knew what the other hand was doing, really. We were trying to get tetanus shots, get any kind of food, get any kind of medical supplies to the people that were in there. You had to be careful. You had to be real careful, because you back a truckload of food up and they'll tear the truck up to get to the food. We never have seen anybody that hungry, but I have. And they were hungry, man. I mean, they'd have eaten anything. And it just tears you up when you think about it. It really tears you up.
Before you do that, tell me everything you remember.
We're just rolling here. We've got a lot of tape, and we don't care how long it goes.
All right, this is segment 3, John Lassing, May 20th, 1990. John, do you remember the exact day this was in April 1945? No.
No, I do not. I do not remember the date.
You didn't, of course, nobody knew much about Dachau, and
nobody knew anything about
right.
Dachau.
You didn't know what you were going in.
Mm-mm.
Some kind of encampment.
Yeah, we had taken the town now. And I guess Dachau concentration camp was maybe 2 or 3 miles out of town. And we had taken the little town. It wasn't that big, I say little town. It was probably a town of 50,000 or something like that. But there wasn't much resistance in the town. So we didn't dally long there. And somebody got word that this encampment was out there 3 miles. And I said, let's go see about it. And we went out there. Well, when we pulled up, the first thing we got was some machine pistol fire out of the guardhouse. Now the gate I'll show you where the sign said, "Work shall make you free." On each side of that gate was a guardhouse, and it was filled with SS guards, and they were fanatical. They weren't about to give up. We did take some of them prisoner right out of there, but they were not going to give up. We had up to that time, man, German army running over us to give up, to get on the American side of the prisoner of war rather than Russian. But these people were not ready to do that. And so I'm sure, I don't know this for an exact fact, but I'm sure that a lot of the guards were killed because they wouldn't give up. And we had them outnumbered about 5 to 1, something like that. And just, you know, we just went on about our business. I don't remember how it came about, but one of the combat infantrymen hollered, "We need medics." And that's how I got to go. And we went up and went through that gate. And as I walked through the gate, the first thing I saw was a railroad siding of gondola-type cars. And I believe, 45 years of memory, that there were 28 of them filled to the brim with dead bodies. And that's the first thing I remember seeing. And then I looked down, and here's this poor devil who wants some. Wants something to eat so bad. I remember I had a chocolate bar in my shirt pocket, and I gave it to him. He wolfed it down. It stayed about 3 seconds. It came right back. From then on, we tried to get them not to eat hurriedly, to take small bites, to eat many times, eat a little, rest a while, eat a little more, and get where they could digest what food they took in. It was hard.
Were there bodies everywhere?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, yeah. There were most of the bodies that were not in the cars were still alive. Some of them were ill. Some of them were down in the barracks in bed, couldn't get out, had been whipped in the bed to try to make them get up to get out. And you know, they just were slaves, is all you can say, and driven by these people who had no compassion for anything. And that's basically what the concentration camps were. I don't believe that anybody could have gone in there and said that, well, these people were just here and we couldn't get all the food they needed, so they are down to, like Mr. Kadar, 70 pounds. That doesn't happen. There's no way that can happen. So it was a real experience for a 19-year-old.
Was there a smell?
Oh, very decidedly. You don't pile bodies in open-top gondola cars and have 25 cars or 28 cars sitting on the siding and not have smell. And of course, what they really were trying to do, I think, was get the crematorium going and burn them. They burned a lot of them. And they hauled, you know, it was sneaky. They had that railroad siding coming into that camp. They would go out and bring in from somewhere else in railroad cars, box cars now, these people, and get them inside the camp and let them out, put them in a barracks. Then they backed the train out. So they didn't know how they got there. They were brought in at night. They didn't know where they were, how they got there, or anything else. And the next thing they knew, they were getting a real first look at what it meant for the Third Reich to take you prisoner. And that's what they were, prisoners. And they weren't prisoners of war. They were prisoners.
You've never forgotten going into Dachau?
Never forgot. I never will forget it. It's etched in my brain. Like I never will forget Omaha Beach either. It's etched up there too, but that's different. That's different. They were running around on top up there and I could see them. And they could see us running around on the beach. And we were healthy. And Dachau wasn't that way.
How long were you at Dachau?
9 days, I believe, if I remember correctly. 8 or 9 days. I was there longer than my medical group was there longer than any of the rest of our outfit because we had to treat people. And they looked at me like I was silly when I told them I wanted rubber gloves. Because disease was running rampant. You know, in that concentration camp, Beverly, and I'm going to call you that, they took men like us that were healthy, put them in altitude chambers, gave them no oxygen, and then lowered the altitude to 50,000 feet to see how much the human body could stand. You have any idea what that does to a body without oxygen, without the right pressure? It explodes. I mean, literally explode. They'd take them and break ice water and stand them in the water until the bodies turned blue. They were nude, and they turned blue. And then bring them in and run them in a room over 100 degrees. Imagine what that would feel like to you. So they did a little of everything to see what the human body could stand, as well as what the mind could stand. It wasn't right. No way. Give me time, please.
Okay. All right.
All the bodies that were laid out were not always dead. Ill, yes, but not always dead. And it was nothing, as Mr. Kadar found out, to hear moaning coming out of a pile of dead bodies. And there wasn't but one thing you could do, combat boots, shoes, and all, is get up there and get on that pile and start looking for that man that was moaning. Because that was a life maybe you could save.
Talk about what you did as a medic in those 8 or 9 days.
Basically, we took people who were starved and fed them. We took people who were ill and medicated to them. Tetanus, typhoid, all those things, shot them, you know.
But now you didn't have medicines and food.
Oh,
when
we
you
got
went
them.
in, but
We
you
got them. Wasn't any problem. I had some medication in the Jeep that I rode in, but we got them. Most of the medication I had was for wounds, like sulfur. You can sprinkle sulfur on the wound and bandage it. But we had morphine, which is a painkiller, and we had, well, later, that far along, I guess, we had all kind of antitoxins. Is that the word I want?
Antibiotics.
Antibiotics that we tried to use to get them to respond. You know, some of them were so lethargic, they wouldn't respond to anything but food. That's all they wanted. And I have never seen anybody that hungry. I had never been around anybody who was that hungry. Can you imagine standing there and having a man crawl up to your leg and grab, and I don't mean just reach out and grab hold. This is a drowning man's grasp to get something to eat. And I'll never forget. I'll never forget the look out of the eyes. That's what lives with me. A look that says, "Can't you help me? Can't you feed me?" and I don't know how you ever overcome it. We stayed there long enough to see most of them back to, they moved to, I've forgotten. It seems like to me they moved a field hospital up there that had a big kitchen, and they fed them. Most of the time they didn't give them but half servings because they didn't figure they could tolerate any more than that. But by the time I left, they had a kitchen. They were in a mess line, so to speak, and grinning for me. And no matter how sick they were still free and being fed. And that's really all that counted.
John, you took some photographs.
Yes, I did. Well, no, I didn't take them.
You didn't take them.
But somebody in our outfit took them with a little box camera. And I have a set here for
Tell us about the other set you're not giving us.
All right. These are made with a little box camera. That's about all they had in 1945. But these are black and white photographs of Dachau.
Turn it around this way, just show us one of those anyway.
Well, let me get over one. That is the guardhouse and gate coming into Dachau. You get it all right? Okay.
But you're not going to give us those because...
No, because I don't have the negatives for these. The pictures I'm going to give you, I took to a photograph spot here and had them take these pictures and make me negatives and then print me a set for you.
Right.
And
But why didn't you want to give me those, John?
I've carried these 45 years. I don't need to be reminded. But if I ever do, that's my reminder.
And can you explain this?
Huh?
Can you explain
You
that?
want to say
Yes.
something?
This is the moat, and in the background is a guard tower that has machine guns that rotate 360 degrees. And they're never manned by over 2 people. But they're very deadly. And anybody that tried to get out of that concentration camp came over that fence that's behind and had to go through that water, and they never got through. They died going over the fence or in the water.
Why don't you turn to the ones that you had made from that, which are a little clearer?
Yeah, much
and-
clearer and much better.
And just hold them up one by one, kind of up against you, and tell
All
us
right.
what's there and what you remember about it.
This is to the left. Can you see that all right?
That's-
This is to the left of the guardhouse. The entrance to the concentration camp was over to our left as we look at this picture.
As a chimney in the background.
I forgot to look. Let me look and I'll turn it back. Part of the heating plant for the guardhouse. Didn't go up very high. But that's what that is. That's the entrance. Now, when I went back 41 years later, they had closed that entrance. You could no longer enter Dachau. We came in down here by the railroad. Let's see. That's the clothes of prisoners, piled up to be searched for valuables, or washed and dyed and made into things for the troops.
Clothes that have been taken off of dead.
Off of dead prisoners. That's the picture
moat.
I showed you before with the moat and the guard tower in the background.
And an electrified fence all around it.
Yes. And if they got through the fence, they didn't get through the moat. The guard tower in the background saw that they didn't get through the moat. These are ones who died, probably of starvation. Some of them had probably been guinea pigged, like we talked about.
Medical experiments.
Medical experiments, but most of them died of starvation.
There was a typhus epidemic too.
Oh
wasn't
yes,
there?
oh yes, oh yes, no doubt about that. That's the doorway to the crematorium. They had 3 gas furnaces with steel stretchers in the mouth of the furnace. And they put the bodies on steel stretchers. And somebody picked the stretcher up. It was on a deal where you picked up on this end and they slid into the furnace and burned. Some of them were not dead. Some of them were burned alive. Going again? Mm-hmm. In the crematorium, they had a room off to the side. And I believe that's where they put most of the teeth and lockets and gold and watches and rings that they took off of people in to be melted down and made into something for the SS troops ladies or somebody else. But
John, when you and Betty went back 41 years later, what was the crematorium like then?
well, of course, they have made Dachau I wouldn't call it a shrine, but they have made Dachau. They didn't do anything to destroy any of that except the old wooden barracks. And they probably had to destroy them because they were probably termite infested, you know, and they had plenty of them out there. But the major difference was that everything was in place. It didn't look like it did 41 years before, but it was in place. I knew where I was. I didn't have to be told. I could point to her and say, this is what I saw and this is what they used it for. And she would know what I was talking about. Ready? Bodies stacked up in cars. Live people on them sometimes, sometimes not. You had to search it out. You had to be aware that there was a possibility and look for it. I think these kind of speak for themselves. The poor devils never knew what hit them, so to speak. This is a gondola type car with some in it. This is the way I first saw it. That type car with the doors closed just ajar, not quite open. You could see in, but they weren't open enough to really tell what it was. And then you walked closer and you didn't have any doubt what it was, because the odor took care of all that. And this is the trains that they brought them in. They're box cars, not big as ours, but they're box cars. That to the right of that train is the fence and the moat. If I'm looking the right way. No, it may be to the train's left. Another gondola type car. And here's some that tried to get away and never made it. And I'd like to present these to you, Beverly. I'd also like to tell you that in this thing right here are the negatives. If you want more copies,
We can make them.
either that or if you'll give them to me, I'll have them made and give them to you. Either way, it doesn't.
John, we're glad to have them as a part of the record, and
It is
we'll make them.
definitely a part of the record.
Yeah.
Definitely is. And it's, like I said, I have a feeling for these black and white ones that I just don't feel like I can give them up yet.
I have several other questions.
Oh, sure.
You were there 9 days.
Right.
War was over, what, a month later or less?
Less,
Yeah.
a lot less. The war was over, for all practical purposes. The war was over May 1st. They didn't finally surrender till the 8th of May, but the shooting was gone. May 1st, there was no more. We just took prisoners and took them back, tried to clean them up and turn them loose and let them go to their homes.
How did you live with what you had just seen?
I don't know if I understand what you mean.
How did it affect you then?
I would say that it really shattered my belief in human nature, that all people are good, because they've just proven to me that they were not. And I'd say that had a bearing on what I felt.
Did you learn about the other camps?
Not until after the war was over. I did not learn about it. And of course, there were many of them. Dachau, I believe, had 11 sub-camps around it, where they'd put them in there and condition them maybe, and then send them on to Dachau. Excuse me. When they got into the sub-camp, if they weren't doing right, they were sent to Dachau for extermination in later years. That's how they came about. And there were so many of them. Of course, you think of the famous ones, Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen and Birkenau, and you think of all those famous ones, and Dachau and all those. But some of the little camps were just as bad as some of the big ones. There just weren't as many in the little camp as they were in the big one.
Did you tell people about this when you came home?
No. No, I could not talk about it. There's no way I could talk about it. I could not talk about some of my other experiences in the war. could not and did not. And I was never able to talk about this much until after we married. And she was going through the cedar chest and found my box. And she wanted to know about it. And I told her about it. And I really, we'll ask her sometime, but I really don't think she believed what I was telling her, because it was so gruesome, so ungodly, that I don't think she mistrusted me. I just don't think she believed what I was telling her. And that's one reason I wanted to go back. I wanted to take my wife back and let her look at what I had seen, and then look at the pictures and imagine what it was like there, then. Like the old TV show they had on. This is May of 1945, and you are there. And it's, you know, it's difficult to imagine.
John, you've always told me that you're a behind-the-scenes person. You don't like doing what
Very
you're doing.
definitely behind the scenes. I do not like to be out front. I have never liked that. I have never wanted anything for myself. I want for my children and my wife, but not for me. And I had a hard time doing this. Without their support and their, you ought to do it, without question, you ought to do it, and yours, I would not have done it this time. I just am not that type person. When my youngest daughter was in St. Cecilia, they were studying this. And I guess through normal family conversations around the dinner table, I had said something about it, or Mom and I had talked about it. And she told her teacher that I had been there. And that sister called me and asked me if I'd come and talk to her history class. And I told her the same thing I told you. I'm not an upfront person. But she said, if you will impart your knowledge to these children, maybe it will never happen again. And I went up there when Mary Catherine was a senior and talked to 2 history classes about it. And that's the only time, outside of the times I've talked to you, that I have ever talked about it.
But you know it's an important story to tell.
Very definitely, I know.
You mentioned Guri Kadar a couple of times and his art. So your family and I finally prevailed that you make your story a part of the record.
Yes, that's right. But I don't have any reason not to talk about it now, because we as a people should never let this happen again under any circumstances. I know you can say to me, oh my Lord, the homeless down here are starving. Oh my Lord, the South Africans are being killed. Yes, that's true. I know that. But this wasn't like that. This was captive. This was prisoner. None of the prisoners in the Tennessee State Penitentiary get treated like these people were treated. None of them. And so it should never, ever occur again. It should be left and yet known for its true facts. I remember a man writing a letter to the editor of the Nashville Banner, and I got perfectly furious. And if Jimmy Stallman had been the then publisher of the Banner, I would have met that young man eyeball to eyeball, because he didn't any more know what he was talking about than a man in the moon. And Jimmy would have.
What does he do?
He wrote a letter to the Banner saying the Holocaust never happened. There weren't any concentration camps in Germany. There weren't any killings in Germany. And man, I got proof right there that there were. And I was there. That's all I need.
John, we certainly thank you for
You're welcome.
doing this.
I hope I have given you something you can use.
You know you have.
I hope so.
We thank Betty and your children too
Yeah.
for their influence.
Well, they really made me do it.